Welcome to another edition of Politico Junkies. I'm Jim. We've got Mike, Rachel, and Glenn Thrush. God, we're lucky. What's the state of Obama? We do this every week trying to figure out what is he going to do. There's been movement in the last week as far as speeches, as far as approach on Capitol Hill today. What are we to make of Obama today and his approach?
Well, I think the White House feels pretty good about this, the corporate tax plan that they came out. They feel that they've regained at least some of the initiative that they'd lost. I mean, the bar is very low. They've had a hideous summer so far. I mean, his popularity has tanked. They've kind of reverted to this back speech on the road. You can basically close your eyes and imagine what the set looks like. But they do feel that they've gotten some movement on this tax proposal. It's gotten
Why do they feel that?
They've gotten a somewhat warm reception in the Senate. You've had a couple of senators say that they will consider this. And that's the name of the game for Obama. That's really the only ally he's got now, is to use Senate Republicans to pressure House Republicans.
And the crux to this deal is different from the old grand bargain of let's talk about entitlement and savings, and more just take the revenue that would come from, or savings that would come from corporate tax adjustments, and then invest it into infrastructure.
Yeah, and you're going to see a real split in the business community here, because there's some businesses that have been pushing for a long time for these changes, but they also recognize that there's now more risk for business. It's now plain as day that to pay for job training, infrastructure, all that money is going to come out of business. Before that was unspoken, now it's definite.
But we're really just seeing here the pregame for the fall fiscal fights, right? Nothing is going to get decided immediately. Congress is about to go out for the August recess, and then everyone's going to be, I assume, in full battle mode when they come back in the fall.
Is there any chance that with all the activity that we've seen from Ways and Means and Finance on tax reform and their road show, a lot of the discussions that have been taking place, and now this proposal, that something could actually get done on the tax side to avert a government shutdown or defaulting on debt?
You know, until a couple days ago, Republicans would have told you no, that they just didn't see it. But you mentioned the road show. Chairman Baucus in the Senate, Chairman Camp in the House, they both have been getting ready. They're going to have what on the Hill they so deliciously call product. If there's an opening, they're going to have bills ready. They're not going to have to go through hearings and all that. And so this is something to throw into the table, and it is something that both sides can talk about as they do these negotiations Rachel's talking about.
One of the real interesting dynamics I think that's shaping up, and Josh Kraushaar, a former colleague who's now at the National Journal, had a little story about this today, where he was talking about the lack of Tea Party challenges from the right. There had been this anticipated wave of Tea Party challenges. It doesn't seem to be shaping up quite as forcefully. And if that is actually true, that means some of these House members might have a little more latitude for action.
It's hard to imagine that happening now. So let's play out the government shutdown scenario, which I think we're all skeptical will actually happen. We talk about all the time. They don't go through it. But you do have Ted Cruz and others now really taunting, like literally taunting fellow members and saying they're part of the surrender caucus if they're not going to actually go to the brink, if that's what it takes.
Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, I mean, there's some influential voices on the other side of that debate.
And they've specifically been pushing this idea of defunding Obamacare, which people know is going to go nowhere. So we saw the Weekly Standard this week pushing the idea of delaying Obamacare, because their view is that's something we can win. That's an issue where we're not going to be embarrassed. Both sides actually might do that.
There's precedent now set by the administration itself, given the employer mandate delay on Obamacare. So there's a fairness argument Republicans can make that they previously couldn't make.
Well, yeah, and if it's not working, like, Democrats might be happy to be thrown into that briar patch.
The White House would be. The White House was obviously fine delaying the one portion of it. They're not fine delaying the individual mandate and the exchanges.
And they think, remember, they're dealing with, and here again you get to sort of the division between the White House and the rest of the Democrats. The White House is a very narrow mandate here. It's like 2 to 3 million younger users, getting them enrolled, and it's a very narrow casted kind of argument. They're not looking to sell this again. They know that this is basically a bag of garbage politically for the foreseeable future. They just want to hit their numbers so that the thing doesn't tank.
But there's the Wall Street Journal's done some fabulous reporting on the real challenges to doing that, because the economics of Obamacare don't work if you don't get enough young, healthy people to sign up to be able to draw down rates for everyone else. And I think there's been terrific reporting showing that even if they put all of their energy into that one small piece, that's going to be a Herculean effort, because for most young people, if you're just looking at it as a raw economic move, you're much better off paying the fine for the first 2 years and then getting your catastrophic coverage once you actually get ill. And I don't know how they get around that.
Well, I think what they're banking on, and I think this really gets down to whether OFA and the Obama campaign infrastructure can come through, because in places like Los Angeles and San Antonio and Cleveland, where they're targeting these efforts, in Miami and the Orlando and the I-4 corridor, these are the Obama core voters, so they're essentially replicating their efforts that they did in turn out the vote. The question again, and you make the point, casting a single ballot for a candidate is one thing. Having somebody incur hundreds of dollars of new expenses is quite something else.
Well, not just that, but negotiating a much more complex process than pushing an I vote button.
Right. When I think of the Fed, I think of sexy political disputes, and we actually have one on our hands as far as who's going to be the next person to run the Fed. Clearly momentum in the White House for Larry Summers. It seems like the president would like to pick him, but there's a lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals, a lot of female Democrats who don't want Summers in there. What do we think the state of play is?
Well, and to carry that on, for all that momentum in the White House, the clear momentum on the outside is for the current vice chairman, Janet Yellen. You see the editorial pages, a lot of the reporting going for her. Interestingly enough,
striking editorial from the New York Times in her defense.
That's right, and calling out the Larry Summers campaign. You're shaking your head.
What is this thrall that Larry Summers has over Barack Obama? I mean, there's been a lot of reporting on this, and you guys have heard this too, that when Summers was in the White House, Obama and Summers would be locked in these 2-hour academic discussions about the economy. I mean, Summers really tickles the Harvard in Obama, right?
Yeah, and his
And
colleagues.
Ben White reporting today in his very smart story about Summers that the White House wants him. President Obama wants him. It's just a question of whether they will go through with that or bow to some of the pressure from the outside.
Is it a theological? I mean, I know it's not popular for Democrats to say it, but there is still a big group of Democrats who want people that are from the Rubin School of Economics, and he clearly liked Geithner a lot. Is that it? I mean, is it more a theological thing? He feels like he actually would be the better Fed chair, and that's the type of monetary policy he wants.
That's accounted for some of the oppo about him that's been coming out, but no, this is much more personal, and the president has a chance to, with Janet Yellen, pick someone who, according to a Wall Street Journal analysis of Fed statements, has been pretty right over the last couple of rough years, somebody who would be the first woman chairman. Larry Summers is a known quantity and has enemies. You don't see a lot of oppo being dropped on Janet Yellen. Now, something interesting the president did when he was up on Capitol Hill meeting with Democrats, trying to convince them to stick with him. He, according to a report from the Financial Times, threw out a third name. By name, he mentioned Donald Cohn, who was vice chairman, had the job that now Janet Yellen has, had been nominated by President Bush. So he's giving himself an out.
As far as changing the equation in Washington, the one big thing I think that we have to watch is the control of the Senate. And Tom Cotton, who we've talked about many times on the show, is sort of one of the stars of the Republican freshman class. He is going to run in Arkansas and give them, I think, a very, very legitimate chance, if not a better than 50-50 chance of beating an incumbent in that state. It feels like the Senate is very much in play, and with each passing week looks better and better for Republicans.
Feels like it's tightening up. I mean, Mary Landrieu is doing pretty well in Louisiana, which is what the Democrats, the life preserver that the Democrats are holding on to. Look, Democrats were saying in the last cycle, this is a pretty disadvantageous map. I think things will look better in 2016 for the Dems, but I think the smart money now is that this majority, at best, gets down to 3.
And Tom Cotton, what does he bring to the table? You know him. He brings money, brings obviously reputation. What else?
Yeah, and he's running in a great state. The current Senator Pryor is popular there, is part of the state, but totally wrong for the state and where he stands. And interesting enough, we were up interviewing Senator John McCain for a column that we did last week, and he expects Cotton's going to win. You have a number of Senate Republicans saying that they think he is the favorite. He has one of the best resumes in Washington. He was Afghanistan, Iraq, a couple Harvards, McKinsey, 30s. So as a campaigner, as a political athlete, he's at the top of his class.
And brings an interesting perspective to a party very much struggling with where it stands on international issues.
Well, and he's been criticized a lot by other Republicans. He's someone who has not gone native here. He's someone who's been happy to criticize Republicans, has been about as right as you can be, and that's going to help him now as he heads home.
I'm going might go a no wiener zone, so we're going to go straight wrap things up by talking about
Is that allowed these days?
yeah, you know what, we're over it. You might be obsessed with him, but
No.
we're not, Glenn. Come
No
on.
fourth place candidates on
When you look at
junkies.
this feud we've seen in the last couple of days, which I think is important as far as it's going to color the debate, I think, for the next 3 years, which is Governor Christie and Rand Paul arguing about both everything about the reach of the government and also where we should be on foreign policy and what we should be doing with 9/11. Governor Christie, if you look at some of the polls, there's a poll out today that sort of examines the state of the Republican Party and where each person fits. He would have a really hard time winning a Republican primary. He's clearly the least popular among Republicans of the candidates that we think will actually run. In fights like this, they do very well for him in his re-election efforts in New Jersey. Probably really hurt him as a national figure for Republicans, right?
This gets to the fundamental dilemma that Republicans have in national elections, right? Some combination of Christie and Paul would do fairly
really
well.
well.
The reason why Romney was selected in the first place is because he was so elastic, and he was such an unknown commodity. I mean, that's why that phenomenon happened. The question is, who can occupy that Romney space? You can't stretch either one of these guys to the point where they're electable nationally.
Yeah, that's why you hear a lot that Chris Christie probably will have his day, but may have a short shelf life. But what you hear a lot of people saying is that whoever becomes the nominee, Rand Paul is going to be second. He's been very smart about repositioning himself, and he's going to have his dad's people plus his own. And so, that's going to be a powerful combination, but probably not enough to get the nomination.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week on Politico Junkies.